The Banu Qurayza were a Jewish tribe which lived in northern Arabia, at the oasis of Yathrib, until the 7th century, when their conflict with Muhammad led to their demise. Jewish tribes reportedly arrived in Hijaz in the wake of the Jewish-Roman wars and introduced agriculture, putting them in a culturally, economical and politically dominant position. However, in 5th century, the Banu Aws and the Banu Khazraj, two Arab tribes that had arrived from Yemen, gained dominance. When these two tribes became embroiled in conflict with each other, the Jewish tribes, now clients or allies of the Arabs, fought on different sides, the Qurayza siding with the Aws. In 622, the Islamic prophet Muhammad arrived at Yathrib from Mecca and reportedly established a compact between the conflicting parties. While the city found itself at war with Muhammad's native Meccan tribe of the Quraysh, tensions between the growing numbers of Muslims and the Jewish communities mounted. In 627, when the Quraysh and their allies besieged the city in the Battle of the Trench, the Qurayza are said to have violated a treaty with the Islamic prophet Muhammad by allying with the attacking tribes, aiming to attack Muslims from behind while the other attackers attack from the front. However, other sources state that Banu Qurayza did not appear to have committed any hostile act and had been overtly correct in their behavior. After the Battle of the Trench ended, the tribe was besieged by the Muslims and charged with treason by a judge accepted by both parties, Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. According to Sa'd's verdict, the men were beheaded, while all the women and children were taken captive and enslaved. Some scholars have challenged the veracity of this incident, arguing that it was exaggerated or invented. History in pre-Islamic Arabia. Early history extant sources provide no conclusive evidence whether the Banu Qurayza were ethnically Jewish or Arab converts to Judaism. Just like the other Jews of Yathrib, the Qurayza claimed to be of Israelite descent and observed the commandments of Judaism, but adopted many Arab customs and intermarried with Arabs. They were dubbed the priestly tribe. Ibn Ishaq, the author of the traditional Muslim biography of Muhammad, traces their genealogy to Aaron and further to Abraham but gives only 8 intermediaries between Aaron and the purported founder of the Qurayza tribe. In the 5th century CE, the Qurayza lived in Yathrib together with 2 other major Jewish tribes, Banu Qurayza and Banu Nadir. Al-Isfahani writes in his 10th century collection of Arabic poetry that Jews arrived in Hijaz in the wake of the Jewish-Roman wars. The Qurayza settled in Marzur, a wadi in Al-Hara. The 15th century Muslim scholar Al-Samudi lists a dozen of other Jewish clans living in the town, of which the most important one was Banu Hadl, closely aligned with the Banu Qurayza. The Jews introduced agriculture to Yathrib, growing date palms and cereals, and this cultural and economic advantage enabled the Jews to dominate the local Arabs politically. Al-Waqidi wrote that the Banu Qurayza were people of high lineage and of properties, whereas we were but an Arab tribe who did not possess any palm trees nor vineyards, being people of only sheep and camels. Ibn Khordadbeh later reported that during the Persian domination in Hijaz, the Banu Qurayza served as tax collectors for the Shah. Account of the king of Himyar. Ibn Ishaq tells of a conflict between the last Yemenite king of Himyar and the residents of Yathrib. When the king was passing by the oasis, the residents killed his son, and the Yemenite ruler threatened to exterminate the people, and cut down the palms. According to Ibn Ishaq, he was stopped from doing so by 2 rabbis from the Banu Qurayza, who implored the king to spare the oasis because it was the place to which a prophet of the Quraysh would migrate in time to come, and it would be his home and resting place. The Yemenite king thus did not destroy the town and converted to Judaism. He took the rabbis with him, and in Mecca, they reportedly recognized the Kaaba as a temple built by Abraham and advised the king to do what the people of Mecca did, to circumambulate the temple, to venerate and honor it. to shave his head and to behave with all humility until he had left its precincts. On approaching Yemen, tells Ibn Ishaq, the rabbis demonstrated to the local people a miracle by coming out of a fire unscathed, and the Yemenites accepted Judaism. Arrival of the Aws and Khazraj. The situation changed after two Arab tribes named Banu Aws and Banu Khazraj arrived to Yathrib from Yemen. At first, these tribes were clients of the Jews, but toward the end of the 5th century CE, they revolted and became independent. Most modern historians accept the claim of the Muslim sources that after the revolt, the Jewish tribes became clients of the Aws and the Khazraj. William Montgomery Watt, however, considers this clientship to be unhistorical prior to 627 and maintains that the Jews retained a measure of political independence after the Arab revolt. Eventually, the Aws and the Khazraj became hostile to each other. They had been fighting possibly for around 100 years before 620 and at least since 570s. The Banu Nadir and the Banu Qurayza were allied with the Aws, while the Banu Qanokh sided with the Khazraj. There are reports of the constant conflict between Banu Qurayza and Banu Nadir, the two allies of Aws. Yet the sources often refer to these two tribes as brothers. Aws and Khazraj and the Jewish allies fought a total of 4 wars. The last and bloodiest altercation was the Battle of Bu'ath, the outcome of which was inconclusive. The Qurayza appear as a tribe of considerable military importance. They possessed large numbers of weaponry, as upon their surrender 1,500 swords, 2,000 lances, 300 suits of armor, and 500 shields were later seized by the Muslims. Kister notes that these quantities are disproportionate relative to the number of fighting men, and conjectures that the Qurayza used to sell some of the weapons kept in their storehouses. He also mentions that the Qurayza were addressed as Alu al-Halka by the Quraysh and notes that these weapons strengthened their position and prestige in the tribal society. Arrival of Muhammad. The continuing feud between the Aws and the Khazraj was probably the chief cause for several emissaries to invite Muhammad to Yathrib in order to adjudicate in disputed cases. Ibn Ishaq recorded that after his arrival in 622, Muhammad established a compact, the Constitution of Medina, which committed the Jewish and Muslim tribes to mutual cooperation. The nature of this document, as recorded by Ibn Ishaq and transmitted by Ibn Hisham, is the subject of dispute among modern historians, many of whom maintain that this treaty is possibly a collage of agreements of different dates, and that it is not clear when they were made. Watt holds that the Qurayza and Nadir were probably mentioned in an earlier version of the Constitution, requiring the parties not to support an enemy against each other. Aside from the general agreements, the chronicles by Ibn Ishaq and al-Waqidi contain a report that after his arrival, Muhammad signed a special treaty with the Qurayza chief Ka'b ibn Asad. Ibn Ishaq gives no sources, while al-Waqidi refers to Ka'b ibn Malik of Salima, a clan hostile to the Jews, and Muhammad ibn Ka'b, the son of a Qurayza boy who was sold into slavery in the aftermath of the siege and subsequently became a Muslim. The sources are suspect of being against the Qurayza, and therefore the historicity of this agreement between Muhammad and the Banu Qurayza is open to grave doubt. Among modern historians, B. Sargent supports the historicity of this document and suggests that the Jews knew of the penalty for breaking faith with Muhammad. On the other hand, Norman Stillman argues that the Muslim historians had invented this agreement in order to justify the subsequent treatment of the Qurayza. Watt also rejects the existence of such a special agreement but notes that the Jews were bound by the aforementioned general agreement and by their alliance to the two Arab tribes not to support an enemy against Muhammad. Sargent agrees with this and opines that the Qurayza were aware of the two parts of a pact made between Muhammad and the Jewish tribes in the Confederation, according to which Jews having their religion and the Muslims having their religion, excepting anyone who acts wrongfully and commits crime, acts treacherously, breaks an agreement. For he but slays himself and the people of his house. During the first few months after Muhammad's arrival in Medina, the Banu Qurayza were involved in a dispute with the Banu Nadir. The more powerful Nadir rigorously applied lex talionis against the Qurayza while not allowing it being enforced against themselves. Further, the blood money paid for killing a man of the Qurayza was only half of the blood money required for killing a man of the Nadir, placing the Qurayza in a socially inferior position. The Qurayza called on Muhammad as arbitrator, who delivered the Surah 542-45 and judged that the Nadir and Qurayza should be treated alike in the application of lex talionis and raised the assessment of the Qurayza to the full amount of blood money. Tensions quickly mounted between the growing numbers of Muslims and Jewish tribes. While Muhammad found himself at war with his native Meccan tribe of the Quraysh, in 624, after his victory over the Meccans in the Battle of Badr, Banu Qurayza threatened Muhammad's political position and assaulted a Muslim woman, which led to their expulsion from Medina for breaking the peace treaty of Constitution of Medina. The Qurayza remained passive during the whole Kanoka affair, apparently because the Kanoka were historically allied with the Khazraj, while the Qurayza were the allies of the Aws. Soon afterwards, Muhammad came into conflict with the Banu Nadir. He had one of the Banu Nadir's chiefs, the poet Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf, assassinated, and after the Battle of Uhud accused the tribe of treachery and plotting against his life and expelled him from the city. The Qurayza remained passive during this conflict, according to R.B. Sargent, because of the blood money issue related above. Battle of the Trench. In 627, the Meccans, accompanied by tribal allies as well as the Banu Nadir, who had been very active in supporting the Meccans, marched against Medina, the Muslim stronghold, and laid siege to it. It is unclear whether their treaty with Muhammad obliged the Qurayza to help him defend Medina, or merely to remain neutral. According to Ramadan, they had signed an agreement of mutual assistance with Muhammad. The Qurayza did not participate in the fighting, according to David Norcliffe, because they were offended by attacks against Jews in Muhammad's preaching, but lent tools to the town's defenders. According to al-Waqidi, the Banu Qurayza helped the defense effort of Medina by supplying spades, picks, and baskets for the excavation of the defensive trench the defenders of Medina had dug in preparation. According to Watt, the Banu Qurayza seem to have tried to remain neutral in the battle, but later changed their attitude when Adu from Khaybar persuaded them that Muhammad was sure to be overwhelmed, and though they did not commit any act overtly hostile to Muhammad. According to Watt, they entered into negotiations with the invading army. Ibn Ishaq writes that during the siege, the Qurayza readmitted Huyay ibn Akhtab, the chief of the Banu Nadir whom Muhammad had exiled and who had instigated the alliance of his tribe with the besieging Quraysh and Ghatafan tribes. According to Ibn Ishaq, Akhtab persuaded the Qurayza chief Ka'b ibn Asad to help the Meccans conquer Medina. Ka'b was, according to al-Waqidi's account, initially reluctant to break the contract and argued that Muhammad never broke any contract with them or exposed them to any shame, but decided to support the Meccans after Huyay had promised to join the Qurayza in Medina if the besieging army would return to Mecca without having killed Muhammad. Ibn Kathir and al-Waqidi report that Huyay tore into pieces the agreement between Ka'b and Muhammad. Rumors of this one-sided renunciation of the pact spread and were confirmed by Muhammad's emissaries, Sa'd ibn Muadh and Sa'd ibn Ubadah, leading men of the Aws and Khazraj respectively. Sa'd ibn Muadh reportedly issued threats against the Qurayza but was restrained by his colleague, as this would have allowed the besiegers to access the city and thus meant the collapse of the defenders' strategy. Muhammad became anxious about their conduct and sent some of the leading Muslims to talk to them. The result was disquieting. According to Ibn Ishaq, Muhammad sent Nu'aym ibn Masud, a well-respected elder of the Ghatafan who had secretly converted to Islam, to go to Muhammad's enemies and sow discord among them. Nu'aym went to the Qurayza or advised them to join the hostilities against Muhammad only if the besiegers provide hostages from among their chiefs. He then hurried to the invaders and warned them that if the Qurayza asked for hostages, it is because they intended to turn them over to the Medina defenders. When the representatives of the Quraysh and the Ghatafan came to the Qurayza, asking for support in the planned decisive battle with Muhammad, the Qurayza indeed demanded hostages. The representatives of the besiegers refused, breaking down negotiations and resulting in the Banu Qurayza becoming extremely distrustful of the besieging army. The Qurayza did not take any actions to support them until the besieging forces retreated. Thus the threat of a second front against the defenders never materialized. Siegen Surrender. After the Meccans' withdrawal, Muhammad then led his forces against the Banu Qurayza neighborhood. According to Ibn Ishaq, he had been asked to do so by the angel Gabriel. The Banu Qurayza retreated into their stronghold and endured the siege for 25 days. As their morale waned, Ka'b ibn Asad suggested 3 alternative ways out of their predicament: embrace Islam, kill their own children and women, then rush out for a charge to either win or die, or make a surprise attack on the Sabbath. The Banu Qurayza accepted none of these alternatives. Instead they asked to confer with Abu Lubaba, one of their allies from the AWs. According to Ibn Ishaq, Abu Lubaba felt pity for the women and children of the tribe who were crying, and when asked whether the Qurayza should surrender to Muhammad, advised them to do so. However, he also made a sign with his hand toward his throat, indicating that the fate at the hands of the Prophet would be slaughter. The next morning, the Banu Qurayza surrendered and the Muslims seized their stronghold and their stores. The men, Ibn Ishaq numbers between 400 and 900, were bound and placed under the custody of one Muhammad ibn Maslama, who had killed Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf, while the women and children, numbering about 1,000, were placed under Abdullah ibn Salam, a former rabbi who had converted to Islam.